Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Dave, and this is the Chase to Summit Trail Talk podcast, where it's kind of like you're out on a trail run with me, and I'm talking, and I won't shut up, but I have a microphone, and you don't. So you're going to have to deal with it. That's fun, right? So if you're a regular listener of this podcast, you may know that I typically post weekly, and I have taken a quick hiatus from both this podcast and YouTube. And that's for a good reason. Although I should have announced it before I took a quick hiatus. I probably just taint my YouTube channel. But it is what it is. I had to do what I did. And that's for a couple of reasons. If you've been following on the podcast, you've heard me talk about how we were going to be moving into a new house. And that happened. I'm actually sitting in my new home right now, talking into this microphone. And it's kind of funny. We've got this walk-up attic area that's huge. It's probably 50 feet long and 20 feet wide. I can't convert it to metric for you metric folks out there. But it's a big space. And eventually this space will become my new YouTube studio and podcast studio and all those things, creative space up here in the attic. But right now it's completely unfinished. So to paint a picture of where I'm sitting, I am on a plywood floor. The only thing in this room is a tiny table with my laptop on it. I've got my microphone. I'm sitting on a chair that I brought up from the basement that's actually like a lawn chair. And that is really it. This room is completely empty. The walls are lined with this tinfoil reflective insulation, and some of the walls are fiberglass. It's just very raw up here. However, I will say it's really helping my audio quality. The audio quality in this attic is top notch. It's totally dead because it's essentially all insulation around me and there's no echo at all. So maybe that'll help the podcast. But the air quality is not great because of all this fiberglass around me. They've got plastic over it and stuff, but yeah, it's a little bit dry. I feel like I've inhaled some chalk. But we'll get through this. So apologies to those regular listeners out there. If you're wondering where I've been, if you've been wondering where I've been, why I've been not posting on YouTube, why I haven't been updating the podcast, that is why I had to take a break. There was the process of actually moving, all of our stuff from my wife's parents' house where we've been living for the past few months while this house was being built. We had to move all that here. We had to empty some storage units. And then there was all the projects. I had to hang up 13 sets of shades and blinds, the home security stuff, the cameras. There were so many things. And I just get, me, I'm obsessive. And when I focus on something, I become laser focused on completing tasks and checking off lists and stuff. And yeah, so I can only focus on one thing at a time, which is why I took a little bit of a break. But that's the intro here. Just apologies. Thanks for sticking around. I hope the regular listeners out there are still listening. And with that, I do want to thank the continued support from the Patreon members out there and the YouTube members. You know who you are. There's people that have been supporting me on Patreon for a year now, and it's so awesome. I've had the privilege of meeting a few of you in person at races and stuff. Just, it's a really awesome vibe. It's a great community, and it means a lot to me to know that you want to contribute a couple of bucks every month to keep me doing this thing that I'm doing. So if you want to become a Patreon member or YouTube member, check out the link at the bottom of the show notes that says support this podcast. That goes a long way with me. Okay, so a quick update on what's going on with me other than moving. This time of year, I don't know about you, but this time of year, I'm susceptible to the dreaded seasonal depression. So this time of year, it's getting cold here in New England. Yesterday at the bus stop with my kids, it was 19 degrees Fahrenheit. And everything's frozen. Things are starting to die. The grass, the trees, everything's turning brown, getting ready to go dormant for the next few months until spring. And this time of year, I all summer, I'm like, it's not going to happen this year, Dave. You're going to keep a positive attitude and you're just going to get through it. But every year I get seasonal depression, and it makes me sad that it's not warm out. I like running in warm weather, and one would argue, Dave, why don't you just move to somewhere warm? Well, that's not really an option. So here in New England, it gets cold, it gets snowy, and I try to make the best of it by pivoting. And instead of running every day, I try to get into my skiing hobby, cross-country skiing, backcountry skiing, skinning uphill, skiing downhill, and resort skiing, of course. And on top of that, I also try to get back into my climbing hobby, which, if you don't know, a few years ago, I got really heavy into ice climbing. I started leading. I could lead up to Water Ice 3. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. That's all to say I became very obsessed with it. And winter actually became fun. When you have all these winter activities like skiing and ice climbing, winter isn't so depressing anymore because you have something to do. But for the past couple of years, I feel like, the pandemic and everything kind of slowed that all down. And now I'm kind of out of the loop. So this year, I've been trying to make a vow to myself to get back into all the winter hobbies. And it's starting to happen. People are starting to ice climb up here in the Northeast, in New Hampshire and Maine. I've been seeing posts of people's first descents on big climbs. And, it's got me thinking. I've been dusting off all my outdoor gear bins from the storage unit. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just rambling on because it's, seasonal depression's tough. And I'm sure a lot of you battle that even in warmer climates. When it gets a little bit cooler, it's frustrating because on a warm day in the summer, I simply just put my shoes and shorts on and go out the door. But on a cold day, you're like, oh, is it 30? That might be t-shirt weather. Oh, is it 10 degrees Fahrenheit? Oh, that's definitely a couple of layers. Like, there's so much more thought that has to go into it. And I feel like a baby because my wife, Jen, has been running every morning at like 4:00 in the morning outside in the cold, and she doesn't even complain about it. And here I am on a podcast with a microphone in my face complaining about it. Anyways, that's all to say that my training hasn't been great lately. I've been, struggling to hit like 20 miles a week because I'm moving, because the weather has been cold. There's a lot of projects going on. The kids have a lot of things going on. So my fitness, my training, just not great. And then on top of that, like the content creation side of things, I feel like I've been getting a little bit burned out because in YouTube, I don't know if you followed along, but last month in October, I put out like 12 videos or something. And it's so much work. Let me, preface this by saying I love it. It is my absolute favorite thing to do. YouTube, making videos, making these podcasts. It's my hobby. It's my passion. I love doing it. I hope they're actually, they're fun to listen to and watch. That's my hope. But even if they're not, I'm still going to make them because I enjoy doing it. So if I didn't enjoy doing it, I wouldn't do it. That said, they're a lot of work, man. Like one YouTube video can be, 4 hours of editing sometimes, 5 hours, 2 hours of filming, testing the stuff in the woods, the GoPro footage. It's a lot of work. And if you multiply that times 12 videos in 1 month, that's a lot, And then on top of that, I do have a real job. So, I don't want to complain because like I said, it is my fun thing. It's my hobby. But I do think I went a little too hard in October with the Apple Watch event and doing a lot of follow-up videos on that. And they were a ton of fun and well-received. And, it's great to see the engagement and the feedback. But I do think I just did a little bit too much. So it's actually been nice to be kind of distracted by the house for the past few weeks and have a reason not to work on videos and stuff. And it's been kind of a good mental reset. I think now getting back into it, I'm going to come at things with a new perspective, maybe a little bit fresher, and hopefully that resonates through the videos and it's obvious. So yeah, that's the burnout side of things. I'm just going to continue to bitch about my life through the first 10 minutes of this podcast. I hope you enjoy that. Okay, so let's pivot. Let's talk about racing. I do have another race on the calendar this year, which is kind of daunting. So in a couple of weeks, this is going to be crazy. My schedule is going to be a little bit crazy. So in 2 weeks, I'm actually traveling for work. I'm going to Texas for my real job. I'll be there for a week on site doing my mechanical engineering thing. And then after that, I'll be flying back to Boston. And I have a race 2 days after my return flight home, which is near Boston. It's in a town called Stoneham. You probably don't know what that is if you don't live around here, but you can Google it. It's called the TARC Winter Classic, TARC, and TARC stands for Trail Animals Running Club. And if you follow me on YouTube and watch my race videos, you've probably seen this mentioned before. TARC is like a local Boston running club that I've kind of become part of just by going to their races. Really awesome vibe, super cheap entry. So it's like $28 to get into the race. And it's like potluck. You bring candy or a snack and they leave it out on a banquet table. And the format of this race is it's a 50K or 40 miles. So you can choose which distance you want to do. And it's at this area called the Middlesex Fells Reservation, which is about 15 minutes north of Boston. And this area is actually surprisingly rugged. There's a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of like sharp rocks and terrain that's pretty tough. And it's actually a pretty challenging area. And most of the locals around here go to the Middlesex Fells for this challenging terrain because it's really good training grounds for like mountain endeavors. If you're planning on doing some mountain trail runs and stuff, and you don't have time to drive all the way to the mountains because they're about 2 hours away, the Middlesex Fells is local and it bears a good representation of mountain terrain. So the format of this is a 50K or 40 miler. The trail is called the Skyline Trail. It's a big circle. It's about 8 miles long. So you can either do it four times, 4 loops, or you do it five loops to get to 40 miles. The starting line and the halfway point both have aid stations. And I tell you, the volunteers at these races are so amazing. They always have big smiles on their faces. They're cheering you on. And fun fact, the TARC Winter Classic was actually my first 50K ever. When I first got into ultra running, I Googled local 50Ks and it was the closest one near me. So I signed up and I got hooked after that because of how awesome everybody was and the volunteers and everything. So yeah, that's what's coming up with me on the calendar in terms of racing. Okay, now that we're about 13 minutes into this podcast, it's time for some news. And that's probably what you came here for, but I like to ramble, so deal with it. First up in the news, I want to talk about some ultra running news. If you don't care, I'm sorry. So Camille Herron, she's a female, amazing ultra marathon runner. I had the privilege of actually seeing and meeting her at the Western States 100 this past June when I was out there with Hoka. She's a Hoka sponsored athlete, and she actually just ran a 100-mile world record time. Now, this is pretty controversial because she was at this race and she ran 100 miles in 12 hours and 42 minutes, which became a world record for her. And she actually beat her previous world record, which she set in 2017. So the race that she ran this time at was at the Jackpot Ultra Running Festival in Henderson, Nevada. This happened back in February, I believe. Yes. And so at the time, Camille thought she broke her world record in 12 hours and 41 minutes. She actually placed second place overall, beating the second place male by 30 minutes, which is kind of unheard of. Usually the top women come in after third or fourth male, but she was right up there in the leader pack. Really incredible. So at the time, she thought she broke the world record, but after the fact, the race commission actually remeasured the course, and the course was actually 700 feet short of the 100-mile distance. So because of this, they've actually pulled that world record time away from Camille Herron. She's posted about this publicly already. She's very frustrated. Obviously, this is no fault of hers. She didn't do anything wrong. She didn't course cut or anything like that. Simply, they remeasured the course and find out it wasn't truly 100 miles. And I don't know how I feel about this, because really, if you do the math, right, 700 feet over 100 miles is like nothing. That's like 0.13 miles. It's like an eighth, not even an eighth of a mile. And that's over 100 miles. And they're going to pull this away from her. I guess I'm not like a rule stickler, and obviously I'm not an elite athlete, so I don't know how I can even chime in on this, but from my perspective, just give it to her. Like, how fast can she run an eighth of a mile? Just add that to her time and she would still get the world record. That's just super frustrating. And I'm not even involved with this, but I can't even imagine how frustrating she would be in this situation. Now, to give you some context, that 12:42 time is an average pace of 7 minutes and 37 seconds per mile for 100 miles. That is just totally crazy. So I don't know, Camille, if you're listening to this, you're not, but if you are by chance, I give you the world record. It counts in my book. I don't care if you got it pulled away from you. It's total BS that they're doing this. And if it was like a couple thousand feet, I'd be like, okay, maybe, but like 700 feet is almost nothing over the course of 100 miles. Okay, with my quick ultra marathon running rant out of the way, let's get into a little bit of the fitness tech news this week. So first up, we've got some news from FitBit. So the Fitbit Sense 2 and Versa 4 came out a few months ago. I've had them. I haven't made any videos about them, but they are interesting. They've got some unique features. They've got a pretty compelling price point. However, Fitbit just added a couple of new features in a firmware update to the Sense 2 and Versa 4. And probably the biggest feature that they added is calling through the device itself, phone calls. So if you don't know, the Sense 2 and Versa 4 both have microphones on board, and they also have speakers on board. So you would think out of the box, they would take and make phone calls, just like something, like the Garmin Venue 2 Plus, or some of the Amazfit GTR 4 watches, or, any microphone and speaker enabled watch typically can make and take phone calls when you have your phone nearby. Now, out of the box, Fitbit didn't give these watches this feature, but as of this latest firmware update, you can now do this. It actually does support using the microphone and speaker to make phone calls. Pretty cool. I haven't had the chance to test this out. I actually just read this on a blog from 9to5Mac, via 9to5Google. I thought it was 9to5Mac. It's actually 9to5Google, but it is pretty interesting. And if you have one of these Fitbit watches, it's a nice update and worth checking out. So check it out if you got one. Next up in the news are a couple of new devices that I've been testing and I've been working on videos on, but they haven't come out yet. So first up, we've got the new Polar Ignite 3. And I'm sure if you're interested in Polar devices, you've seen videos from the other YouTubers out there. Everybody made a video except for me. Sorry about that. However, I have the device. I've actually been testing it for well over a month now. So I've got a lot of experience with it, a lot of test data, a lot of test runs, and it's a really unique device. So the Polar Ignite 3 comes in at $329 US. And at that price point, it's got a really interesting feature in that it is dual band, multi-band GPS enabled. And there's really no other watch on the market at that price point that is multi-band GNSS enabled, unless you look at something like some of the Amazfit watches, which I think the GTR 4 is. But this one in particular has that feature, which is nice. It also has a really nice AMOLED touch-enabled display. It's got a great form factor. The price is right. And they made some good updates in the software. However, I do have some issues with the Ignite 3, and I'll go into more detail about this when I actually make my full in-depth review about this watch, which I'm planning on filming either today or this weekend. So stay tuned on the YouTube channel for that. First of all, the GPS accuracy on the Ignite 3 in my testing so far hasn't been great, which I thought was pretty odd because of the fact it does have multi-band GPS mode. And if you don't know, multi-band GPS mode is kind of the gold standard when it comes to GPS watches. So like the Garmin Fenix 7, the Vertex 2, the Epix, a lot of these watches coming out right now, it seems like everything has to have multi-band mode in order for it to be a new device. So it's good that they added it, but the GPS tracks I'm getting are just not great, which is strange. Another really odd thing about the Ignite 3 is I'm getting a lot of lag in the menu system. So things like pulling up my phone notifications or swiping in between widgets or even like hitting the button on the watch to get back to my home screen or the watch face can take like a couple of seconds, and it feels very odd and a little bit dated. And it's strange because Polar actually in their marketing documentation say they've upped the CPU and GPU power of the watch to make it more fluid and seamless. And in some regards it did, like doing certain actions, it's actually very smooth. It feels very like Apple Watch like. But then doing other actions, very specific actions like pulling up notifications, there's a lot of lag. And I just don't like that. I don't know if it's a firmware thing. Maybe it's maybe it'll get better over time. But right now, it's the lag alone drives me crazy. And I'll talk about more in the video. But yeah, that's the Polar Ignite 3. The other watch I've been testing out, I've actually got on my wrist at this very moment, is the new Garmin Instinct crossover. And I wish, I'm so behind on all the content stuff I'm supposed to be making, but I've got a lot to say about the Instinct crossover. If you don't know, I'm sure you've seen videos from like DC Rainmaker and DesFit, but the Garmin Instinct crossover is essentially a Garmin Instinct 2, which came out a while ago, which is kind of a rugged, military, utilitarian kind of watch. Kind of looks like a G-Shock kind of watch. But what they added to it is physical watch hands. So inside the display of the watch, there's real mechanical watch hands that move to give you an indication of the time of day. And, at first when I heard about this and saw the marketing material, I thought it was a little gimmicky. Like, they're just going to get in the way. Why would you want that? I'm kind of all digital, all utility. I don't care about physical watch hands. But after wearing this thing for the past couple of weeks, it is super cool. There's some level of like nerdy gadgetry goodness to it that just makes it fun to wear. The watch hands are really, it makes the watch look a lot more classy. It blends in a lot better in a professional environment. Even though it's a plastic watch, it's not like a Fenix or anything. Although it would be super cool to see like a Fenix 7 with like metal watch hands. Maybe that's coming. Like a Fenix 7 crossover. That would be super cool. Maybe they'll do that. Anyways, the watch hands have a really cool effect on the look and feel, aesthetics of the Instinct crossover. Another thing that's interesting about it is they like gave it this like 3D look to it. So there's like the Gorilla Glass layer on top. Then below that, there's like a bezel that's under the glass. And then there's like iridescent numbers that glow in the dark around the perimeter. And then below that is the digital display. And then on top of the digital display are those physical hands. So it kind of gives it this like diorama kind of 3D effect when you look at the watch. It's super cool. I'm not going to lie. So, on paper, I thought it was a bit of a gadget. In person, it feels like a proper timepiece. And I kind of like it. I kind of like what they did here. And honestly, I think it was a good move with what Garmin did, because I think a lot of people who bought Garmin Instinct watches were drawn to it for the aesthetics, the look, the sort of like G-Shock nostalgia that comes with that. But now you get those physical watch hands to even bring that one level further. So I think all you Instinct nerds out there are really going to appreciate the crossover. So what, other than the new, physical watch hands, the Instinct crossover is essentially an Instinct 2, but there are a couple of updates other than the watch hands. They added the new GPS chip that's available on the Garmin Fenix 7, the Garmin SQ2, the 255, the 955. That GPS chip with all systems enabled which gives it much better GPS accuracy, which I can attest to in my testing. It works great. Good GPS accuracy all around. It's not multi-band enabled like the Garmin Fenix 7, but it does have all systems, which is really good. Now, the really cool thing about the instant crossover is you would think the watch hands would get in the way of using the watch because the display is actually under the watch hands, but that's not the case. So what they've done is very clever. When you cycle through different menus, like for instance, if you go to the weather page where you have a 5-day forecast and you have vertical columns for your weather going across the screen, what they do is they actually take the physical hands and just make them go vertical. So the minute hand is up at the 12 and the hour hand is facing down at the 6. And by doing that, it just gets out of the way of viewing the weather. Another example of this is if you go to your body battery or a horizontal graph, it'll actually flip the watch hands horizontal. So instead of going vertical from 12 to 6, it's now going the other way, perpendicular to that. So it just gets out of the way. And it does this in every different screen. Every time you switch a screen, the watch hands will move to get out of the way of whatever data you're trying to view. This also plays a role when you're in an activity. If you've got 3 data fields or 4 data fields, it'll move the hands out of the way in such a way so you can actually view your data. And actually a really interesting use case of these physical hands is when you're in an activity and looking at a heart rate graph. So if you're looking at the heart rate zone graph, which is kind of like a speedometer, right? You've got a needle that kind of moves to show you where your heart rate is on a gauge. They'll actually use the physical hands of the watch to aim the hand at the zone that you're in. So the mechanical hands will actually move depending on your heart rate. It's a lot of fun. I don't know what else to say about it. I like what they did here. However, it is a little bit expensive for the highest end solar model. You're looking at $500, and for at that price point, you're comparing that to something like the Garmin Forerunner 955, which has more features. You got mapping, you got dual multiband GNSS, so there are more features there for the same exact amount of money, but you don't get that je ne sais quoi, that certain something that gives it a different vibe. So that is the Instinct crossover. And what I think about it so far, again, I will have a full YouTube video about all of these devices I'm talking about now. But for now, these are my quick, couple minute reviews of each one of these watches because I haven't made videos about them. And hopefully this is helpful. Okay. Now I just want to talk briefly about some Black Friday deals I've seen floating around. So if you're in the market for a new fitness tech wearable watch type thing, now is probably the time to do it. There's a lot of Black Friday deals already happening and Cyber Week deals. It seems like Black Friday isn't so much of a 1 day thing anymore. It's like a 1 week or 2 week thing now. So if you're in the market, go check it out. I'll just briefly talk about some notable sales I've seen so far. First up, the Garmin Fenix 6 and 6X and, the 6 series, including the Enduro 1. I've seen them on some killer deals as low as like $300 for some variations. Go check out the links in the show notes because they're always changing. But if you're interested, solid watches, they still have mapping and navigation and, body battery and all that stuff. They just don't have all of the new stuff like the Fenix 7 with its multi-band GPS and everything. Another area where I've seen a lot of sales are actually on Apple products. So the other day, I noticed the Apple Watch Ultra was on sale, which is interesting. I didn't think I'd see that happen. It wasn't a huge sale, but it was like $30 off on Amazon. And on top of that, I also saw the new Apple AirPods Pro 2s on sale at their lowest price yet since launch. And I got to tell you, those earbuds have become my favorite. I use them every day now. I use them in bed to listen to podcasts. I use them for editing videos and stuff. I don't really use them for running because they do tend to wiggle in my ear a little bit. I still use the Beats Fit Pro for running, but the Apple AirPod Pro 2s are amazing. If you have an iPhone or an iPad or a MacBook, they just work so well. So highly recommended. and they're on a pretty good deal right now on Amazon as well. Again, links in the show notes. And I'm not going to ramble on and on about sales and Black Friday stuff in this podcast, but I do want to let you know that on Black Friday, which is only a few days from now, I will be going live on YouTube. I'll just be going through some of the sales that I'm finding and talking with the viewers in real time, live, in the live chat, taking questions, talking about sales and deals, doing all that fun stuff. I'm going to schedule that right after this podcast. I'll put up the thing on YouTube so everybody can find out about it. But if you're a podcast listener, I would love it if you could join me on Black Friday, carve some time out of your busy shopping schedule to hang out with me on YouTube. And if I'm forward thinking enough, I'll drop that link to YouTube Live in the show notes of this podcast. So yeah, check it out on Friday. I don't know the time yet, probably around noon here in the Eastern time zone. I don't know what that is for you, but I'll figure that all out and I'll drop it in the show notes. So join me. Okay, and now it's time. We're 31 minutes into this podcast for our questions and answers Q&A of the week. So if you don't know what this segment is, every time I post a podcast, I go over on Instagram and I drop one of those stories where you can actually fill in a question for me to answer. And what I do is I take all of these questions, I put them up on my phone in my hand at this very moment. There's actually still questions coming in because I posted the story a couple of hours ago, and I answer them live on the air with no pre-planning or anything. And I think it's kind of fun. Hopefully you enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, let me know. Shoot me a DM or something. Also, if you want to become part of this and have your question answered and featured on the podcast, follow me on Instagram. Again, that'll be in the show notes, but it's just at Chase the Summit on Instagram. And stay tuned to my stories because I do it every time I have a podcast. So you can also, if you don't have an Instagram account or whatever, you can also just send me an email using the contact form at chasethesummit.com. Head over to chasethesummit.com and click contact and then fill that out and send me a message. And it can be a question, can just be saying hi, telling me that you hate my podcast. I would prefer if you don't do that, but if you have to, feel free. Okay, with that out of the way, let's dive into the first question this week. Fit Gear Hunter. He's another YouTuber, by the way. Go check out Fit Gear Hunter's channel. He asks, do you use training readiness as a guide for how you approach your daily workouts? So training readiness is a feature specific to Garmin watches. And what that is it's a culmination of a bunch of different metrics. They take your sleep tracking, your body battery, your HRV status, and they kind of aggregate all of this data to give you an idea of how ready you are to take on more training. And to answer your question, yes, I really, really like training readiness. And I find that it really reflects how I feel most days. Like nothing is the Bible for me. I'm not gonna put all my eggs in an electronic device and trust it to let me know when I should be training and when I shouldn't be training. Because a lot of times, if I have a couple of cocktails the night before, training readiness is going to tell me not to go for my run. But I still will. So at the end of the day, I still trust my gut, my perceived feeling, how well I feel over any electronic device. But I will say training readiness is super cool. And it's a metric I really enjoy using. Hope that's helpful. Next question comes from Powell Z. What do you think about the Wahoo, Santu, Polar, and smaller manufacturers? Are they closing in? So you're asking some of the smaller manufacturers, are they getting closer to like the big ones like Garmin and Apple? I think in some ways they are. I do have some concern for some of the brands out there. Specifically like Suunto, they were regarded as one of the best, years ago when GPS watches were first starting to iterate and get a little bit better. Suunto is really at the forefront for the good battery life, accuracy, good looking devices, and reliability. However, recently they felt like they've kind of been slipping back a little bit. Just recently they had the Suunto 9 Peak Pro come out, which I do have a review unit for, and I'll have a video about that eventually. But, even that watch, it did make a couple of steps in the right direction, but it didn't make any huge leaps that I was hoping for. It would be really cool to see Suunto just, drop a bomb of really, innovative stuff, an OLED display, maybe full mapping capabilities, because that's kind of their forte, is being like mountain watches. And if they could crack that code and, really challenge something like a Garmin Epix Gen 2, I think it could turn them around. But I do have a little bit of concern. The same could be said for Polar in a lot of ways. They really haven't changed their user interface or software or the back end with Polar Flow. There's a lot of things I wish they would, innovate and just push the boundaries a little bit more. Because as they iterate, as they bring new devices out, the new devices feel a lot like their old devices. So, it's like anything. Early days of cell phones, every iteration was a huge leap, right? And then it started to slow down as we started to approach the boundaries of that technology. And I think we're starting to see that with fitness watches as well. The huge leaps aren't happening as much anymore. You've got good GPS accuracy on just about every watch out there. Heart rate sensors are getting better. But I think there needs to be more focus on the software, the user experience. And I think a big focus, a big shift, I'm probably going to go off on a tangent here, is that these brands need to focus more on providing more usable data. The end user doesn't want to have to be a professional coach in order to understand what their watch is trying to tell them. I think these brands really need to, like what Garmin's doing with training readiness. They take all that data, they take all the numbers, they crunch it for you, and then they spit out digestible information like, hey, don't run today. Your training readiness is low. But a lot of these companies are just like, here's your heart rate variability, and here's your max and min heart rate. And people don't know what to do with that information. I'd really like to see a big shift in how that's displayed. And I think that's a good opportunity for someone like Polar, because they've got a good history in that, just making the information a little bit better. Sorry, that was a long answer. Next one, let's see. We've got another question from Paul Z that's pretty similar. We've got Brains Q Wish D. He says, yippee, where have you been? So I kind of answered that in the intro of this podcast. I've been a little distracted with moving and my real job and stuff, but I'm back, baby. I've got a lot planned for YouTube and for this podcast. So stay tuned. Thanks for the question or statement. Runner Kingling, Garmin Enduro 2 versus Vertix 3. I don't think there is a Vertix 3 yet, so I can't answer that for you. Next question, Andrew ARW. Is the Apple Watch Ultra something you'd recommend for a lifelong Garmin user? 955 currently. So you have a Garmin Forerunner 955 and you're considering the Apple Watch Ultra. Yes and no. It depends everything, I hate saying it depends, but it really does. If your experience with the Garmin Forerunner 955 that you currently own is leaving you lacking in terms of like smartwatch functionality, if you really want to make phone calls from your watch, if you really want a cellular connection on your watch so you don't need to bring your phone everywhere with you, yeah, the Apple Watch Ultra is the best in terms of smartwatch functionality. Now, when it comes to being a sport watch, for mapping and navigation, for tracking your activities, for general wellness information about your sleep, your training readiness, your body battery, the out-of-the-box experience with the 955 is leaps and bounds better than the Apple Watch Ultra. Because out of the box, the Apple Watch Ultra really doesn't provide a lot of actionable information about your wellness. The workout app is okay, but it could be a little bit better. And it doesn't give you really any form of proper navigation other than the Compass app, which is kind of lacking. That said, you can download apps and all kinds of different things to make the Apple Watch Ultra a better sport watch. But even when you do that, even if you spend money in subscriptions and everything, I still find the experience as a sport watch better with a Garmin. So it comes down to what you need. Do you want a smartwatch or do you want a sport watch? And unfortunately, right now, you still have to make that decision because the Apple Watch Ultra, even though it's become a lot better than the older versions in terms of battery life, it still doesn't have great battery life. You charge it, every other day, every 2 days, every 3 days, maybe if you don't use it a lot. There's still that limitation where with a Garmin, you can go a couple of weeks on a single charge. So it really comes down to what you need, what you want out of your wearable. I hope that was helpful. Next question. Hello, Flo. Biggest tech expectations for 2023. Ooh, that's a broad question. Biggest tech expectations for 2023 and biggest sports and outdoor anything for 2023. Wow. Biggest tech expectations for 2023. I guess if we're talking outside the world of fitness tech and running and stuff, I'm going to go with the new MacBook Pro, the M2 16-inch MacBook Pro. It's kind of a nerdy answer, but I'm recording this on the M1 Max the M1 Max 16-inch MacBook Pro. I love this laptop, but I'll take all the horsepower it can get, and I have high hopes that Apple's going to, do something crazy with the next iteration of that. And then in terms of the sports tech for 2023, okay, I'll go with Garmin adding LTE cellular functionality to their high-end watches. So like calling and texting capabilities to the Phoenix 7 and the Epics, maybe with a new version called the Epics Plus and Phoenix Plus or something like that. I would like to see that because that is really one of the biggest selling points for the Apple Watch Ultra and why people will buy that over a Garmin. And if Garmin could implement something like that, it would be really cool. Now, interesting side note, if you've been following Garmin news, they actually released a kids watch. This should be in the news segment, but they released a kids watch called the Garmin Bounce. Yeah, the Bounce, like bouncy ball. And I'm actually very interested in it for my older kid. He has a Gizmo Gadget LG watch that's kind of outdated. But this Garmin watch, the really interesting feature about it is not just the watch, but it's the fact that Garmin is rolling out an LTE infrastructure for phone calls and text messaging on this kids watch that'll cost $10 a month. And it's not tied to any carrier like AT&T or Verizon or whatever. It's their own independent thing that you sign up through their website. And the fact that that exists on a kid's watch has me thinking that they're probably planning on rolling it out to other devices. Specifically, I bet we'll see it first in something like the Venue, and then it'll probably bump up to, everything after that. But yeah, pretty cool. But that's probably where I want to see the biggest, leap in terms of fitness tech in 2023 is more cellular connectivity. Next question from Maximal D. Clef. I hope I said that right. Is your daily driver still the Forerunner 955, or did you switch to the Apple Watch Ultra? I still mainly wear Garmin, but it's, I hate saying it's my favorite or my daily driver or whatever. I wear Garmin because I've got so much historical data in the Connect platform that I hate giving that up. So in the Garmin platform, specifically with like the 955, you've got HRV status and training readiness. And to get those to work, you have to wear the watch for 3 weeks, which is a long time. So when I stop wearing it, I start to lose that data, and that bugs me because I'm kind of OCD and want to keep all my data. So I end up going back to it. So yeah, right now, the 955, actually the Instinct crossover is on my wrist right now, but that's only because I'm testing it. The 955 is mainly on my wrist, but I will say I really like the Apple Watch Ultra. There's nothing wrong with it, and it's a really solid option. Hope that's helpful. Next question comes from Hankster Rods. What's your biggest struggle as a dad and runner? Yeah, great question. 100%, I'm going to say time management. Most days it's really hard just to walk through my schedule. I hate to complain on bitch about my life on this podcast, but where else am I going to do it? Our daily schedule in this house goes something like this. My wife wakes up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to get her run in, her workout in with her friends. She'll either work out in the basement on the treadmill or do yoga or whatever. And then I'll wake up with the kids, typically around 6:30, maybe 6, maybe 5:30 if the kids wake up early. I make them breakfast. I help them get ready for the day. I pack their lunches and everything. And then I help get 2 of the kids in the minivan with my wife. And then I walk my other kids to the bus stop, which is like, I don't know, 1/8 of a mile, maybe 1/4 of a mile away from our house. So we have to walk there every morning. After that, I go to work. And then when I get home from work, that's kind of my time to get my run in. However, it's usually mixed with craziness going on in the house. So it's hard for me to just say, I'm putting my shoes on and going for my run. Instead, I have to like help make dinner, or maybe the baby's crying or someone doesn't feel good. There's always something going on. And now with the new house, there's like projects, hang up pictures, or, the blinds are broke. I don't know. There's a lot going on. So typically I'll end up running on the treadmill or running in the dark way later than I want to. And it's not great, but it is what it is. It's what I have to do. And single-handedly, that is the biggest struggle of being a dad. It used to be easier. I think 2 kids is probably the sweet spot for time management. You can kind of figure it out. But once you have 3 or 4 kids like we do, it really multiplies how hard everything gets. And I don't know if that makes sense. It makes sense to me. So yeah, being a dad is tough, but it's rewarding. So I'm not trying to complain about it. I'm just trying to explain the struggles. And I'm sure all the dads and moms out there can understand where I'm coming from here. Next question. Colorado Wild. He asks, what's your favorite trail running snack for long days out? I am a simple man when it comes to trail running snacks. I like Cliff Bars. I'm not going to lie. It's like the quintessential trail running thing, but the white chocolate macadamia Cliff Bars, man, they just hit the spot after a long day out. Another clutch, probably more higher rated in my mind than Cliff Bars. It's going to be gummy worms. Gummy worms, baby. If you're a trail runner or hiker in the winter, up here it gets super cold out, and it's a weird thing that I like. But what I do is I put my gummy worms on the outside of my jacket, like in my outside pocket, so they freeze. Frozen gummy worms really hit the spot on a long winter hike. I don't know why. The next question from Colorado Wild is how to manage running in the gym as not to turn into a string bean, as my girlfriend calls it. That's interesting. I guess the way to not turn into a string bean is to eat a lot. I don't know. I genetically, I can't be a string bean. I look like I work out a lot more than I do. And I guess I'm lucky in that way. But yeah, I would say just eat a lot, focus on your diet, and maybe don't, again, I'm not a nutritionist or a coach or anything. This is just me rambling on. But if you're going to eat a lot, I would focus on quality, high protein, not tons of sugars and stuff like that, maybe, and see if you can bulk up. It's kind of I hate when people say, oh, you're going to get a runner's body. Like, what does that even mean? Runners are all shapes and sizes, And yeah, maybe like the top elite runners at the Boston Marathon, first and second place, maybe they're extremely skinny and tall. That doesn't mean you're going to be that way, because you're probably not placing first or second at the Boston Marathon. Those people are running hundreds of miles a week, 200-mile weeks, like Eliud Kipchoge. I think he said he runs between 125 and 150 miles a week. Most people aren't doing that. And even if you do that and eat a lot, you could probably avoid being a string bean. But being a string bean is an advantage for those people who are competing at the highest level. They're carrying less weight. They're more aerodynamic. They're faster. So, I guess if it's an image thing, if you want to look a certain way, you could probably get around that with diet and probably just do the bare minimum in terms of like gym workouts, do some curls and, basic body weight exercises like push-ups and pull-ups and things like that. And you'll probably not look like a string bean. That's the most I can help you there. Next question comes from the same person, Colorado Wild. Thanks for all these questions, by the way. Should I skip a marathon and do a 50K instead? I can only speak from my experience on that. I would 100% rather run a 50K than a road marathon. So it really comes down to, I would say it comes down to the event. If the marathon is like regarded as a super fun thing to do in your neck of the woods, then maybe do that. But like, I think the community and vibe and overall fun of a 50K is probably funner than a marathon. But it really depends on your goals. If you want to run a fast marathon, maybe get a PR, try that. If you want to go out for a fun day in the woods on trails and meet some interesting people, probably have some conversation, I would say try the 50K. It's a different vibe, just it really comes down to what you want to get out of it, what kind of fun you want to have. So yeah. Next question. Do you still wear the Apple Watch Ultra daily? I already answered this one. Yes and no. Some days I do, some days I don't. Next question is feel the need. Tell us about your worst race injury. Ooh, worst race injury. So my worst injury didn't actually happen at a race. I was out on a solo hike. It wasn't even a trail run really. So it was in the middle of the winter. I believe it was January. Very cold day. Digits well below 0 Fahrenheit. So whatever that is in Celsius. Brutally cold. Hiking up a mountain in the White Mountains of New Hampshire called Mount Moriah. I was alone. It was actually a weekday. I broke all the rules. I didn't really tell anyone where I was going, what I was doing. I had told my wife that I was going for a hike. Didn't really tell her where. And then I decided to hike Mount Moriah. So I'm on the trail, the Carter Moriah Trail to be exact, a couple of miles in. And it's super icy and my footing wasn't great. So I put on micro spikes. Those are metal spikes you put on your boots or shoes to gain traction. And so I'm making my way up the mountain, but these micro spikes were really not putting a dent in how slippery the trail was. And right at the summit, I was like, I don't know, probably an eighth of a mile from the summit when I slipped and dislocated my knee in such a painful way. My knee completely twisted sideways. There was a huge pop and it was extremely painful. I could not put any weight on it. So here I am. I forget how far this hike is. It's like 8 miles round trip. So I was 4 miles into a 8-mile hike, halfway up a mountain in well below 0 conditions, freezing cold, with no one there to help me, no cell phone signal, and didn't tell anyone where I was. So kind of a bad situation. So the actual injury turned out to be that I broke a piece of my meniscus in my kneecap when I dislocated it, which ended up requiring surgery down the road. They had to go in and kind of fish out the little piece of bone and stuff. And it really sucked. But the scary part of it was really getting back to my car after that happened. I actually slid on my butt for 4 miles or whatever. I think it was like 3 or 4 miles. I slid on my butt down an icy trail on the rocks and roots and snow for like 3.5 miles. I was super cold. I did have a satellite PLB, personal location beacon on me that I could have used. I thought about it. I didn't do it. I self-rescued because I was too embarrassed to do that. But yeah, that was probably my worst running injury because it stopped me from running for a really long time after that. And even to this day, it still, barks at me sometimes if I'm in a really heavy training block. I'm doing 50 or 60 miles a week. I'll start to feel that soreness in that area. Fortunately, it hasn't really bothered me since though. So yeah, that's I guess it's not like a specific running injury, but that's one that stands out in my mind. The next question comes from Christos KR. He says, no Sun2 9 Peak Pro review, ? So that is in the works. Like I said earlier, I've got one. I've been testing it. It's cool. It's different. It's definitely a step in the right direction for Suunto, but no review yet. Stay tuned to the YouTube channel. It is coming, I promise. I'm just catching back up with all this stuff. And the final question for this podcast is from Miguel Miguiver. I don't know. I can't pronounce it. How did you get into running originally? This is kind of a fun story. So I started running probably 10 or 12 years ago. Yeah, something like that. I was dating my wife at the time. We were living together in a condo, and I was kind of a gym guy. So I would go to the gym and lift heavy weights, and I was kind of heavy. I was heavy set at the time, but it's mainly because I was focused on being as big and strong as I could be. So for context, I'm like 5'7" on a good day. And at the time, back then, I weighed like 205 pounds, which is pretty heavy for a man of my stature. For reference, right now, I'm about 150 pounds. So I was like 55 pounds heavier than I am right now. One day, I was just like, I was gasping to go up a flight of stairs. I felt heavier than I should be. And I made the conscious decision in my head to just start getting into cardio. So I went on Amazon or some running store website, and I ordered a pair of running shoes. And when they showed up in the mail, my wife actually laughed at me, and she's like, what are you going to do with those? I was like, I'm going to start running. She was supportive, but it was kind of a joke that like I ordered this stuff that I probably had no intent on using. Anyways, fast forward to today. I don't know. I've run a lot of 50Ks, 50 milers, 100 milers, and it's been kind of a, snowball effect since then. I don't know what caused me to get into running or why I liked it. It was kind of the trail running perspective that really drew me to it. The kind of Zen state you get into. It's kind of like meditation when you hit that flow state on the trails and the weather's right and all you're focusing on is your next, foot strike hitting the ground and where it's going to be and to avoid that rock. And, oh, look at that. That's pretty. And it's just like all those things. It really just unplugs my mind from the craziness of life and allows me to kind of go Zen for a minute. So that's how I got into running, why I got into it. There's probably a longer story than that, but I'm not going to bore you with it. So that's all the questions I have for this week. I want to just thank everybody that wrote questions in. I really appreciate it. And I hope this is a fun part of the podcast and it's not something you get bored of. With that said, thank you for listening to this podcast. I do want to mention one more thing I forgot to mention at the beginning. There is a discount code live right now at the merch store, at the Chase to Summit merch store. Go over to chasetosummit.com/shop or just Chase to Summit and click shop and use discount code LISTEN, LISTEN 10 at checkout for 10% off your whole order. And this is only a discount for listeners of this podcast. If you made it this far into the podcast, you probably enjoyed it. And this is just a nice way to get some Chase to Summit merch. If you're interested, we've got the Ridgeline trucker hat in stock. We've got all of the neck gaiters and t-shirts and sweatshirts. Go check out the merch store. Get 10% off. Wear it with pride. Tag me on Instagram if you decide to get one. That'd be cool. And yeah, hope you enjoy it. One more time, I do want to thank the YouTube members and Patreon members that make this podcast work. I appreciate everything you do. I appreciate the contributions that you've been giving me every month, and it allows me to keep this microphone turned on. And with that, we have reached the end of the podcast. I'm going to get this show back on a regular cadence, so you should hear from me again next week and the week after that, and so on and so forth. Again, follow along on YouTube. Lots of videos coming up, and I will have a Black Friday live stream coming on Friday that you, yes, you, cannot miss. Make sure to go over to the YouTube channel, subscribe, and click reminder on that that live stream. I'll try to get the stream up today so you can actually get reminded. Haven't done it yet. I've got too many things to do. Too many things on my plate. Oh my goodness. All right, friends. I'm going to leave it with that. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And if you did, make sure to give me a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. If it's Spotify, 5 stars. If it's Apple Podcast, 5 stars. And on Apple, you can actually leave a comment and say what you like about the podcast so other people can read it and maybe learn something about it. And that goes a long way with the algorithms and listeners and stuff like that. Okay, I'm going to go now. I've got a lot of things to do, including cleaning up this attic I'm sitting in. Okay, friends, I'll see you next time. Bye.